The daughter of a man who shot 2 women in suburban Perth says she feels let down by police and is calling for urgent and systemic change to address domestic violence. Mark Bombara shot Jennifer and Gretel Patelchis in Floreat on Friday before turning the gun on himself. 27-year-old Ariel Bombara says her father was looking for her and her mother and murdered her mother's best friend instead.
She says she'd warned police on 3 separate occasions about his behaviour, his stockpile of guns, and how she and her mother felt that their lives were in danger.
I feel at a loss in terms of how to support women going through similar circumstances when I and my mother and the Patelchises have been so badly let down. And so here I am, another woman, apologising for men's behaviour. So I am sorry to the women suffering through this abuse who aren't receiving the help that they need. And now is the time for Australia to come together and actually do something about this scourge of domestic violence on our society and start listening to women and protecting them. I'm not a lawyer or a politician or a policeman. That's their job, is to solve this problem. It shouldn't fall on the women of, who are survivors of domestic abuse to have to solve the problem. It's on our governments. That's what you're employed to do. So I'll leave that with them, but I will keep fighting for this.
It's Ariel Bombara there. I can't imagine what she went through having to make that statement. Not surprisingly, it was so powerful. The WA Police Commissioner, Col Blanche, announced plans for an internal investigation in response to Ariel's claims. And do remember that if you or someone you know needs help, you can contact 1800 RESPECT by phone or their website. There's also Lifeline on 13 11 14 if you're experiencing distress. Well, the Immigration Minister has ordered an urgent review into visas recently reinstated by a Commonwealth tribunal, which have allowed a number of convicted criminals to stay in the country. The Home Affairs Department has also admitted it failed to warn the Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles, about several urgent legal challenges involving visa holders. Liberal Senator and Opposition spokesman on Home Affairs, James Patterson, joins us now. James Patterson, good morning. Thanks for joining us on News Breakfast. Well, first of all, let's get your take on this review that Andrew Giles has ordered. What do you make of it?
Well, it's the logical thing to do, but frankly is too little too late. It was over a year ago now, in January 2023, that the Minister issued a new ministerial direction which had the effect of requiring decision makers, including the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, to put greater weight on someone's ties to Australia. And the result of that, as the department warned him at the time, is that fewer people who committed serious crimes who are non-citizens would be deported. And we've seen that in the most horrific detail over the last few days, including a new case uncovered this morning by the Australian newspaper of a man who offended in terms of rapes and sexual assaults against 26 women and girls who came from Scotland, who is not an Australian citizen, who has been allowed to just stay in our country as a result of this direction.
So who should cop the blame from this? Because the direction was brought in, but it's up to the tribunal to interpret that direction, isn't it?
If it was just one rogue tribunal member or one decision, maybe you could blame the AAT. But now we have dozens, in fact more than 30 cases that the media has uncovered of serious violent criminals who've been allowed to stay in our country. And what those decisions have in common is they all point to this ministerial direction, and the new primary consideration that Andrew Giles inserted into that direction, that considerable weight should be given to a person's ties to Australia, regardless of their level of offending, if they've been here for a long time. And so really the only person who can take responsibility for this is ultimately Andrew Giles. And if he refuses to do so, then the Prime Minister should do so. We think Andrew Giles should be sacked, and we think Direction 99 should be immediately repealed and replaced with the previous direction to the Department and the AAT, which required other factors to be weighted much more highly than someone's ties to Australia.
So if you scrapped Direction 99, what would you do about the issue of New Zealand? Because this was brought in part because New Zealand was worried and concerned about getting lumped with criminals who have lived in Australia virtually all their lives and they were being deported to New Zealand. What would you do instead?
Well, not just in part, entirely. Jacinda Ardern lobbied Anthony Albanese and he gave in. Instead of standing up for Australia, instead of protecting Australia, he gave in to Jacinda Ardern. My view is if you're a guest in our country, if you're a non-citizen, regardless of how long you've been here, if you commit a serious horrific crime, you have broken all the principles of your stay in this country and you should be deported. No ifs, no buts. I don't care if you came here when you were 5, but in some cases these are people who came to Australia in their late teens, in their 20s and even their 30s. So the idea that these people should not be deported from our country I think is completely wrong. And a future Liberal government, if we're elected at the next election, will begin deporting these dangerous criminals again.
Senator, we also heard in Senate Estimates Committee yesterday from the Home Affairs Department that it failed to warn the Minister about a number of criminals who could have their visa cancellations reinstated. What's your reaction to that?
It's very hard to understand how this happened, and the department had no good answers about how this occurred. I'll be re-prosecuting that issue with them today because, frankly, the Minister and the Minister's office should have noticed that they were no longer being notified about these cases. It's utterly routine for a Minister for Immigration to be notified by cases like this. If all of a sudden you stopped hearing from your department about this, wouldn't you have asked some questions? What happened to all those referrals? What happened to all those notifications? Aren't I required to make decisions cancelling visas? Something that a Minister for Immigration does on an almost daily basis, if not weekly basis, and yet when that didn't happen, it appears that Andrew Giles asked no questions at all.
Senator Patterson, we also heard in a different Senate Estimates Committee, well, in a Senate Estimates last night, that a fifth of almost 10,000 Palestinians who've sought a temporary Australian visa since October 7 have had their applications rejected. So that's just over 2,300 approved. At the same time, more than 3,300 visas have been approved for Israelis. Is there an imbalance here?
I am concerned that 2,300 visas have been granted to Palestinian document holders in a very quick period of time after the 7th of October. Let's remember that this is a war zone controlled by a terrorist organisation, and on average these visas were granted in 24 hours. In some instances they were granted in as little as a few hours. And I don't know how you can do an adequate identity check, let alone a proper background check and security check on people like that. The reality is we have a serious enough problem with anti-Semitism in this country, serious enough challenges with social cohesion before we go in increasing that by bringing in people who have attitudes that are problematic. So I'm very concerned that the department and the government has rushed this process unnecessarily.
But are you not concerned that the Palestinians are living in a war zone at the moment, that many of them are fleeing for their lives?
Absolutely. There are no doubt genuine innocent people in Gaza who want to flee, and Australia has a role to play, but we have to do it carefully by protecting our own national interests and our own national security. The safety of the Australian people must come first, and we must do adequate checks. We know adequate checks weren't done because after many of these visas were granted, they were subsequently cancelled. So why would you cancel a visa that you initially granted if all the adequate checks was done in the first place? It's very clear this was a rushed process, and as a result, things were missed and visas had to be subsequently cancelled.
Minister, I want to ask you about China as well. There have been reports from a former Chinese spy who has said that there are 1,200 spies from China in Australia. How concerned are you, and what should be done about this?
Well, look, these are very shocking revelations, and even if the number is not quite as high, it is no doubt that China is the #1 source of espionage and foreign interference risk in this country. They're also the #1 source of state-backed cyber attacks and state-backed intellectual property theft. We need to take this challenge even more seriously than we have been over the last few years, because this is a very serious, dominant and rising power in our region, and they intend to reshape our region in a fundamental way that is against our national interest. We must be very robust in standing up for ourselves. We must provide our agencies with the resources and the powers that they need to defend our democracy, because nothing less than that is at stake.
Senator James Patterson, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, News Breakfast did invite Immigration Minister Andrew Giles to speak with the program, but he declined to do so.
In other news, Israel's military has denied launching fresh strikes on a tent camp in western Gaza, days after an attack on the region set off a fire which killed dozens of civilians and sparked international condemnation. Israel's investigating that incident, saying the deaths of civilians was a tragic mishap. Foreign Minister Penny Wong has reiterated calls for a humanitarian ceasefire.
The death and destruction in Rafah is horrific. this human suffering is unacceptable. And we reiterate to the Government of Israel, this cannot continue.
The Northern Territory Police Commissioner is expected to front the coronial inquest into the 2019 death of Kumanjayi Walker, the last of more than 70 witnesses appearing in the 2-year investigation. Mr Walker was fatally shot by former Constable Zachary Rolfe, who's been acquitted of all related charges. The inquest has uncovered evidence of the widespread use of racist language and slurs among police officers.
New South Wales Police have charged 3 men over a fraudulent e-tag scheme worth more than $2 million. Detectives from the Financial Crime Squad say the scheme has been in operation for up to 5 years, with 800 tags in circulation, with the majority of tags being sold to taxi drivers. Police allege the syndicate obtained up to 10,000 compromised identities and banking details that were linked to the e-tags.
Victorian Police are investigating a fire at a tobacconist this time in Melbourne's west. Investigators believe the offenders smashed a front window of the store in Footscray early this morning and hurled a Molotov cocktail inside. No one was injured and no arrests have been made.
South Australia's Country Fire Service is on alert with strong northerly winds and above average May temperatures forecast. The CFS has 5 aircraft on standby in the event of a fire escalating. Crews have responded to burn-offs going out of control during April and May, and landowners are being urged to wait for a cool change before conducting any controlled burns.
This is my house. I have to defend it.
And if you're looking for somewhere to hang out at home alone, well, one of the most famous houses in movie history is up for sale. Kevin McAllister's home from the Christmas classic is on the market, with the 5-bedroom, 6-bathroom mansion in Illinois listed for about $8 million. It comes with a gym, a private movie theatre room and an indoor sports court. Fortunately, booby traps are not included.
Oh, but does it have a tennis court?
What? I wonder if you can keep the change, you filthy animal.
Very funny.